As Atty has pointed out, we have a humanitarian crisis in Artsakh today. The human suffering is immeasurable, and our primate has asked us to gather in prayer. Atty has asked me to take a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes. I think it'll be less than that for me to cover this topic. I'd like to cover in that short time 3 specific matters. One, what's happening? What's the history of what's happened there? Secondly, what's the current situation right now? And third, and most importantly, what can we do about it? A brief history of Artsakh. I think you've all heard about it. Unfortunately, it has not been in the mainstream American press. Artsakh, as you know, is a beautiful mountainous region, also known as Nagorno-Karabakh. Artsakh and Nagorno-Karabakh are the same. I'll use the terms interchangeably. It's in the Armenian highlands of the Southern Caucasus. The Armenians have been there for centuries and centuries, a long time. The churches, the edifices, the monuments, the cemeteries all attest to the Armenian presence. In 1988, the legislature of Karabakh voted for independence and to reunify with Armenia. Thereafter ensued some terrible battles. In 1994, they began, and I'll focus on just 2 of them, in 2020 and then 2023. After the 2022 battle, Armenia lost the territory, a large part of it, and it was in danger of starvation. The Azerbaijanis put in a blockade of the Lachin corridor, the only connection Artsakh had to Armenia. There was no food, there was no medicine, there was no fuel, there was no water. They were cut off from all of that. But a ceasefire was agreed upon, and supposedly there was protection for the Armenians. 5,000 Russian peacekeepers were to keep the peace. And the Minsk group, comprised of the United States, France, and Russia, were to assure peace and negotiate for further peace. In spite of all that, the 5,000 peacekeepers and the Minsk group, in September of 2023, Azerbaijan breached the ceasefire, and with high-tech weapons coming from Turkey and other countries such as Israel, decimated the Armenian population. It was over before it began. The Armenians did not have a chance. What happened after that was even more tragic. While the population was decimated, they were evacuated. They were forced to leave. 120,000. If you can imagine the entire population of Hartford, Connecticut, which has about 120,000 people, being forced to evacuate in a couple of days. Of that 120,000, 30,000 were children. Even worse, many were kept behind. A period of widespread ethnic cleansing followed. They destroyed the monuments. They sandblasted the churches. Not an Armenian word can be found on the churches. The monuments were down. The cemeteries were desecrated. There was no trace to be left of Armenians. So what's the current situation? It's terrible. In a single word, it's terrible, and it's getting worse. The Armenians have been displaced. Ethnic cleansing has been going on, and oil and gas-rich Azerbaijan continues free from any criticism throughout the world. Now, Atty mentioned the hostages. Who are they? Tragically, we don't really know how many there are. We expect that there are about 23 prisoners of war and 8 prisoners of state. These were leaders who were kept behind. A witness for the Congressional Tom Landau's Human Rights Commission testified recently that Azerbaijan has 303 political prisoners it holds, and it's growing every day. There was no discrimination between wealth, social status for these prisoners. One of them is a billionaire, Ruben Vartanya. born in Armenia, made a fortune in Russia, came to Artsakh to help his people, and he's being held. His lawyers tell us he's being tortured to this day. To this day, Azerbaijan denies the whole thing. It never happened. It never happened, they say. Mark Mamigonian of the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research recently gave a talk, and he likened the Azerbaijan position to what he called gaslighting. Blame it on the victims and deny it happened. But fortunately, there are many organizations which won't allow it to be forgotten. Many human rights organizations, Freedom Now, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the European Council of Human Rights, genocide scholars all over the world decry this. The European Parliament has recognized it, and the International Court of Justice has condemned these actions. The former chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court refers to this as nothing less than a continuing genocide. And if things were not difficult, complicated enough, there's infighting among the Armenians. The opposition government in Armenia claims that the government in place is not doing enough to get the hostages home. They further claim that the diaspora, those of us in outside Armenia, are not doing enough to help them. And all the while, the refugees who've been forced from Artsakh are now in Armenia, and there are reports that they're being abused in Armenia. What's the most appalling thing about all this is that despite all of these human rights violations by Artsakh, with the help of its parent country, Turkey and Artsakh refer to themselves as two states and one nation. Starting tomorrow, November 11th, Artsakh will host the United Nations Climate Summit, which is COP29. In the shadow of Artsakh, in the shadow of all this killing, with one of the worst human rights records in the world by the ratings of the human rights organizations, they're going to host this conference when all of their economy is really driven by fossil fuels, and they just committed this atrocity, and the world is not noticing. So what can be done to stop this? Our church leaders have asked us to come here in a day of prayer. So we are doing that today, communally and individually. I stress to you that what we're talking about is not political rhetoric, but rather putting a value on humanitarian rights. But you can't value humanitarian rights in a vacuum. We really need to take some action. And what can we here at Holy Resurrection Church do? What value, what contribution can we make? Well, I'll give you a few suggestions. First and foremost, we have to be aware, realize what's going on. You won't read about it in the American press. Starting tomorrow, read the papers. You're going to read about the summit, the Azerbaijan summit on climate change. But there'll be very little said about what they've done in the year before that. Read the Armenian papers, the weeklies in English. They're very accessible, they're online. Secondly, listen to the advocacy groups we have, ANCA and the Armenian Assembly. They have websites, and they are a wealth of good information. Be aware of representations taken by public figures, and make sure that they stand up and stand behind their comments. For example, in September of 2023, the Acting Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And what she said was, the United States, and I'm quoting, the United States will not countenance any action or effort short, long-term, to ethnically cleanse or commit other atrocities against the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh. This is not acceptable, end of quote. A week later, Azerbaijan attacked and desolated the area, Despite these words from Undersecretary of State, the United States has taken no meaningful action. It has spoken words, but has not taken action. We must demand that what was promised will be delivered. We also should insist on the enforcement of laws that are already on the books. There's several. I don't have time to go into them, but we must insist that our leaders use these existing legislative enactments to follow through and protect the Armenians. And we must stand up against the outlandish denialism by Azerbaijan and Turkey that this is happening. We also will be asked for donations at the diocese, other organizations, humanitarian organizations, the Fund for Armenian Relief. Many of us remember Sarah from AYO coming to South Church in Britain and later here. This is an organization that is worthy of our consideration. We should consider them. This is a humanitarian crisis of unparalleled proportion. We all have the ability to take at least some small action. I'll end where I began. We must focus on prayer. But we must look and think about how this will end. Right now, it doesn't look as though it's going to end well. No one knows at this moment. Armenia itself might be in jeopardy, as the Azerbaijanis refer to Armenia as Western Azerbaijan. We can all do something, and we